Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Yeah. So we are here for Astro-Babble. It's been a couple days. Yesterday was very interesting because we had some tech issues. Poor little laptop had to go to the computer hospital, but everything is fine. And Facebook decided that it didn't want to go live on Google Chrome anymore. So that's fun. But we are back. We are at it, and we have 8 more charts to get into. Thank you all for continuing to support the live stream by sharing it with friends and family. And yeah, we've got 8 more charts. We're going to read them cold. So I've generated them in my Astro software, and we are going to talk about what the different planetary placements mean. And I always think that that's really fun, but sometimes it does come out as Astro-Babble, which is the title of the show. So we are going to pop open a fizzy water and get to these 8 charts. If you would like to submit yours, just send me a private message, only do not comment, only private message with your birth date, place, and exact birth time, and I will add you to the queue and message you the morning that your chart is being featured. All of these are recorded, so you can always go back to it, and yeah. Cool. So first chart of the morning we're going to do is Dee's chart. Dee was born at 2:33 p.m. in Altoona. Altoona. Good morning, Miss Mary Kate. How you doing? We're going live on Instagram and Facebook as well. So we've got a Cancer ascendant here in Dee's chart, with the moon being the ruler of the chart up in the 8th house of death, taxes, estates, and business. That's a little bit of a tricky placement. We've got the sun in Aquarius, Mercury in Aquarius, and the moon in Aquarius, all in the 8th house. Gives Dee some like creepily intuitive abilities, which I really enjoy seeing. That's something that a lot of people don't necessarily talk about in the 8th house, although it's associated in the 12-letter alphabet of astrology, which I don't like to use. With the sign of Scorpio, which is very dark, very underworldy, we tend to associate the 8th house with death in general. So when I find major placements here, especially in Aquarius, which is very, very telepathic in general, we see that there's a lot of just that communication with the other realm in Dee's chart. However, it is very draining for her when we look at this South Node placement in Cancer in the 1st house of self. Just having a personality, this is something that I see a lot in Aquarius in general, but something that I think is unique to Dee's chart as well. Having a personality is very draining for Dee. Putting on that caring face and really allowing some of that compassion to show through does take a tremendous amount of energy, where her sun, her Mercury, her moon, all in that 8th house, it's a lot easier to talk to people, to work with numbers and things that are a little bit less physically present, but still represent things on other layers of consciousness. So we have this new moon in Aquarius that we're dealing with in the 8th house of business as well. There are entrepreneurship tendencies, but when we look at the Mercury being combust with the sun, so within 7.5 degrees on either side, it's a little bit tricky. Words can often get lost with Dee. This is very similar to having Mercury retrograde in the chart. When Mercury is combust the sun, or when Mercury is retrograde in a chart, it automatically indicates communication issues in the chart, just in general. The words that come out of the mouth are not necessarily received the way that they're meant. And so we see this in Dee's chart for sure, especially since Aquarius tends to be a little bit on that higher level than most people. Very Asperger's, very kind of genius mentality, but the words, the thoughts, the concepts that come out need translating anyways. And to have that Mercury so close to the sun in the 8th house of death, taxes, estates, business, there are things that Dee is interested in and that she focuses on that are just unable to be communicated to us mere mortals. And that becomes a little bit of an issue. What else do we see in the chart? An interesting pairing when it comes to the 7th house of relationships. We have the North Node here, which means that one of Dee's life missions specifically is to master this idea of having a spouse and having a partner to share a life with. However, we do have Venus and Jupiter here in the same sign of Capricorn. Both Venus and Jupiter specifically, does not like to be in the sign of Capricorn at all. So we do have a little bit of bumpiness in that situation. We do have a lot of that seventh house conflict in Dee's chart that I think needs to be a little bit remediated. But, Capricorn's in it for the long game. So seeing that sign with the North Node, I enjoy that placement, but we need to understand with Dee that partners are going to be rough, but those partnerships in general are meant to be teaching Dee a lot, especially because the ruler of her seventh house of relationships is this Saturn in Gemini retrograde in the 12th house of hidden enemies. We find that a lot of the backwards communication that she struggles with, her partners are uniquely qualified to decode, and or they might intentionally block out those languages, that those word communication transits in Dee's chart, in order to help her to grow, to use her words, to allow some of that new moon in Aquarius, Mercury in Aquarius ruling the chart up in the 8th, to be translated and filtered down. But because relationships are going to be one of the sore spots in Dee's chart, we need to understand that, yes, it's tough, but you're also working towards like a better version of you, honey. Yeah. So that's just something to be aware of. We do have Mars in Sagittarius, Neptune in Sagittarius in the 6th house. That's an interesting combo. Interesting indeed. I enjoy seeing Mars in the 6th because it gives Dee this really powerful work ethic, not necessarily workaholic tendencies, but somebody who once she commits to a job, she's in it to win it. Very competitive at work as well, slightly overly competitive because of that Sagittarius mindset. Also, that Mars in Sagittarius is ruling the 10th house of success. So because that Mars is so driven, she does get very, very good at what she does, and she's very well known for it. So that's fun, especially when we look at the idea of the 6th house ruling not just work, but also health and pets. Having a career in the health industry, something that she would be naturally good at, especially hospice care or end-of-life care because of that 8th house flavor of death, or working in the finance department because of especially the sun ruling the 2nd house, or starting in a business for herself where she's actually working with people one-on-one. That would be excellent. We do have this Neptune in Sag in the 6th. So I think that there's this trait to Dee where she has a tendency to, on the lower end of the expression, and this is something that I talk with clients a lot about, these planetary placements, especially when younger, are not fully understood. And somebody's trying to call me. Weird. Call me via Facebook. Just tune into the live stream, Judith, honey. So when we look at Dee's chart with the idea of this Neptune and Sag in the 6th, we have a tendency, especially when Dee was younger, to spin stories in the workplace, to paint things as a little bit better than they actually were, to the point of actually like bold-faced lying to managers, especially if she was in a sticky spot. But when we get into the higher octaves of that experience, it's definitely a placement that I like to see in the 6th. If she were to do any managerial stuff or work with people in general, because it would put them at ease. This Neptune in Sagittarius is able to spin these stories like a silk cloth or shawl that kind of is wrapped over the shoulders of somebody who is ailing, who is not in an ideal situation, which again, especially if Dee goes into healthcare with this emphasis on the 6th house of work, health, pets, I think that would be very much ideal. I think one of the reasons why Dee disassociates so much is because she's got this Pluto and Uranus, both in Libra, both retrograde in the 4th house of family. Not ideal at all from that perspective. We have Pluto, which for the first 50 years of life tends to be pretty toxic, tends to be pretty mysterious. And then we have Uranus, which is that planet of unpredictability, that planet that comes into a house in the chart and basically just is bull in China shop, is a good way to think of it. Even in the sign of Libra, we have a lot of things that need to be just rectified in the family space for sure. Just as a final note, we need to watch, because I'm seeing multiple hits from a medical astrology standpoint, to digestion stuff and eating. We have Cancer on the ascendant, Mars in Sagittarius, which rules the liver. So we have stomach, liver stuff, and then to see this toxic kidney stuff in the fourth house with Pluto, Uranus, I think that diet needs to be especially watched. We need to be very observant, especially when the low back starts to ache, especially when there's going to be bloating or distension in the stomach area. That could not just be stomach, that could also be liver stuff, blood sugar stuff, etc. We need to watch that. Okie dokie. So that's our first chart. And yeah, we've got a couple more. Couple more to go. Okay, now we get to pull up Judith's chart. Okie dokie, Judith. So we are at 4:15 p.m. in Eugene, 4:13 p.m. in Eugene for Judith's chart, which puts Libra on the ascendant. I always enjoy a good Libra ascendant because there's this beauty, there's this sense of charisma, there's this sense of just having a sugar-coated surface is a good way to say it with a Libra ascendant. And that's something that I think is really valuable in the life. We do have two issues, though, in the first house of self. When we see, again, we have the South Node that's present in the first house, very close to the ascendant. So the idea that the personality itself is very, very draining to Judith. It takes so much energy in order to keep up this Venusian facade. And I think that's true, like beauty comes at a price. But there's also just this natural feeling of, gosh, it's tough being this pretty, and respecting that energy drain. Like, you don't need to put on airs for everybody all the time, for sure. This Neptune in Libra retrograde in the first house is an interesting development. Whenever Neptune is in the first house, we need to be very aware of escapism tendencies, running into fantasy worlds, especially crafting, like we said with Sagittarius, but Libra tends to be a little bit more judicial in that way. Sagittarius tends to craft stories, whereas Libra tends to paint a picture of things that are equal when things are not actually equal. It's kind of like a good analogy with Neptune and Libra is whitewashing, like the idea of retelling stories in a way that are or retelling yourself life experiences where they're actually more beneficial, more positive than they actually were or are. So that's something that we need to be aware of. On the higher octave of that experience is a very spiritual placement. To have Neptune and Libra in the first, there's this kind of goddess Mot deity who weighs the heart and soul of all beings via a feather, via the Egyptian pantheon. You know, that's a good image for Neptune in Libra in the first house. Chart ruler is Venus in Pisces, so whenever we have the chart ruler in the sixth house of work, there are workaholic tendencies that tend to be present because Venus is ruling the chart, and Venus is, oh Lord, Judith, this is such a positive placement. I can't get over this. We have Venus in Pisces, the sign of her exaltation. So Venus is very, very happy here, and she's ruling the chart, which is wonderful. But then we also have Jupiter here. Jupiter in Pisces in the sixth house of work. The one thing that you will not need to worry about is this idea of work taking care of you. When you stay busy, you tend to create beautiful things. Venus in Pisces, especially in the sixth, you would be excellent in fashion. You would be excellent in any of the makeup, the beauty. I've even seen some clients with this placement who are very good at special effects, Photoshop, things like that, where we are using that exalted Venus to create beauty for other people. And especially with Jupiter and Pisces here, you're working at scale. So you especially like managing a fashion designer's portfolio or managing a warehouse of fashion or fashion shows. Just the idea that everything beautiful, everything lovely, everything that is aesthetically pleasing, art gallery stuff, community events that revolve around art or things that are aesthetically pleasing, music, etc., all in your sixth house of work, health, pets. I think that's absolutely glorious. from a medical perspective, this does bring up a cautionary tale because we do have Pisces, the sign of the feet, and the lymphatic issues in the 6th house of health. Paired with Libra, the sign of the kidneys on the ascendant, there's this issue with filtration, water balance, and kidney lymphatic things that we're seeing right out of the bat. Not necessarily a fan of that. We need to watch swelling. We need to watch mineral intake. We need to be very careful of things like caffeine. We need to be very careful of things that overtax the kidneys because they're already pretty taxed with that south node in the 1st house. And the first sign or symptom of any disease is going to be swelling. Yeah, and that's going to be Pisces causing havoc in the body systems. Do have an interesting formation in the 11th house of friendships and social groups. We have Pluto in Leo as well as the moon in Leo here within 4 degrees. Pluto is also retrograde in the 11th house of friendships. Friends, not necessarily easy for the first 50 years of life. Not easy because there's a lot of showboating, and you're like, well, when people have that ego, when people have that chip on their shoulder, it makes it really hard to befriend them. But then you start to realize about halfway through the life, oh, everybody has this chip on their shoulder. Everybody has this idea of who they are and what they're good at, and that's not necessarily a weakness. That's actually a strength, and it makes people really interesting. So that's something to be aware of. We do have a not so great financial placement, so we need to be kind of aware that the finances are not ideal when it comes to making your own income. We have Saturn retrograde, Mars retrograde associated with the 2nd house of finance. So that's going to be tricky. But because Saturn is associated to some degree, we do have a maturation of finance, so money will get easier during that 1st and that 2nd Saturn return. Last bit before we move on, that Mercury Taurus and Sun Taurus up in the 8th house of business does give you this entrepreneurial spirit, because we have a major personality marker being the Sun, as well as Mercury, the mind, in that 8th house of business, but also death, taxes, estates. The mind is constantly focused on the money that it can't have, and especially in fashion, like, that's super important to have that business mindset if we were to go there in the 6th house. But then also the fact that your own personal finances are somewhat suffering. I like to see this Mercury and Taurus in the 8th that really talks about being able to balance a budget, to work with a spreadsheet, to understand the financial intricacies and what it means to be of value, but also to have value in the chart, which I think is a good remediation for all of the other placements for sure. And then as a final note, you also have that North Node in the 7th house, Judith. So there's this need for you specifically to work on your relationships as the major kind of focus of your life, transmuting enemies into friends and working with especially intimate relationships with spousal partners that you choose, and understanding that, yes, there is a tendency for them to default into that you against me, me versus you mentality, slightly competitive, slightly combative. But if you are aware that, yes, we can coexist and we can actually make peace break bread, if we just channel some of those aggressive tendencies towards coming together as opposed to separating and finding our differences. Yeah, so that's that. Good morning, everybody. Yes, so this was you, Judith. Thank you so much for jumping on. You can watch the full recording because all these are recorded via the live stream. I also post them on YouTube. Good morning, Susan. Good morning, Blythe. And good morning, everybody on Instagram who's joining and watching. I appreciate you. And we are on to our 3rd chart of the morning. So let's talk about Kelly. So we've got Kelly, who was born at 11:45 a.m. in Toronto. We've got Gemini on the ascendant, making Mercury the ruler of the chart. Mercury is up in the 11th house in Aries. I like that placement, Kelly. I really do. Mercury, I think, does very, very well in fire signs, especially Aries, where Mercury gets some rocket fuel to play with. Having a Mercury and Aries ruling your chart, Kelly, really does bring about this beautiful fiery energy, as well as this airy mentality of having a very quick mind, sometimes to your detriment. This is something that I see a lot with Mercury and Aries. Sometimes the words fall out a little bit too fast. They tend to get a little bit, your tongue tends to get a little bit ahead of the mind in that way, that only a Mercury and Aries really can. But I think because the Lord of your chart is in the 11th house of relationships, one of the most important parts of your identity is your friendships and finding people that you can really call your tribe, who also have really quick minds, who are very, very spunky, who have this uplifted, slightly competitive energy to them, where they're always trying to lift each other up, always trying to support each other, but who are also very active and reaching for better versions of themselves. Oh, that's interesting. So we have a stellium in the 7th house of relationships. We have Saturn, Mars, Uranus, and the moon all in Sagittarius in the 7th house of relationships. That's packed a pretty interesting punch, but it's all being ruled by this lovely, absolutely lovely Jupiter in Pisces up in the 10th. I think we need to talk about success before we talk about relationships, although they're very, very connected. You have beautiful things, Kelly, happening in your 10th house of success. You've got Jupiter in Pisces conjunct the MC, the midheaven, the highest point of the chart, which is a point that we look at for just overall the top of somebody's personal mountain. For you to have Jupiter, the luckiest planet in the chart, to be here in the 10th house, we really have some interesting stuff here playing out for sure, as well as the sun in Pisces in the 10th and Venus in Pisces, the sign of her exaltation in the 10th house of success. Fame is something that you're naturally going to be thrown into. It wouldn't surprise me, especially if in early childhood and throughout the life, you're constantly pushed into positions where you are taking center stage. You are allowing yourself to be seen in the public eye. You are a very prominent figure in people's lives, and that's all because not necessarily the ruler of the chart is there, but we do have 3 very significant, very exalted placements in the chart, with that Jupiter in his own sign can join the MC, Venus co-present in her exaltation of Pisces, plus the sun, the major personality marker, sandwiched between the two of them in the 10th house of success. That's beautiful placements. But I think that we need to understand the ruler of your relationship house is in the 10th. So a lot of this fame, a lot of this 10th house career success could actually be secondhand via a spouse. And or you could kind of marry into or naturally kind of date or partner into that level of success. Regardless, the success is a part of your chart. If it was you, if it was them, doesn't necessarily matter. But we do have this compound effect of you also having a spouse who is very, very in those worlds that you have been thrown into success-wise. But I think we have some interesting stuff to talk about with the spouse, because your tendencies and their tendencies are similar yet different. There is a sense of play that you can both appreciate, but the reason why you play, Kelly, is to get better. Like you're playing with the idea of training with this Mercury and Aries ruling your chart. However, with all this Sagittarius stuff in the 7th house of relationships, you're attracted to, but also get kind of pissed off at, this Sagittarius energy who's running around trying to make light of life when you're like, hey, there's serious work to be done. We actually need to do something productive with all of this. And this is really when they kind of dig in their heels and they're like, no, life is supposed to be enjoyed. And you're like, yes, life can be enjoyed, but the enjoyment comes at a price, and we need to pay that price, and our price is growth. So we do have little bit of conflict there from that perspective, especially because we don't have the Mercury angle as much here in the chart, it wouldn't surprise me if another thing that kind of pisses you off about a partner is their inability to express their words. Because fire signs are all about action. We have a lot of Sagittarius energy here. Mars is here. Your partner is going to communicate by doing, communicate through their actions, and really kind of tell a story through their schedule, as opposed to you, who you really want to sit down and like talk about the latest book club stuff and really get some of the latest facts and listen to the latest TED Talk, and all of these things that are, again, growth oriented, productivity oriented, but the partner that you choose not necessarily going to be down with that. But again, like, great partnership choice, and including that Jupiter in Pisces in the 10th of success, massive amounts of attention flowing your way, which I think is glorious. But we do have some issues in the work house. Huh, that's an interesting twist. Interesting twist, for sure. We've got this Pluto in Scorpio retrograde and South Node in Scorpio retrograde as well in the sixth house of work, health, pets. From a health perspective, whenever we see South Node in the 6th or the 1st or the 12th, there's a little bit of an issue here because this is a very depleted body system. And we have Scorpio, which rules reproductive, bladder, colon, sinus, all with that South Node Pluto very close together in the 6th house of health. So there's going to be some toxicity in those body systems that potentially prevent you from working. And when your schedule gets too out of control and you're working too many hours, those are the body systems that you're going to feel it in first. Which is not necessarily great, but it does allow you to moderate that fame a little bit better, moderate that success, and really give you that life check, which is, I think, what brings us around that 7th house of relationships. Is we have a partner who's trying to intentionally distract you, trying to get you to smell the roses, but you're not necessarily programmed to do that. So the health issues and the partner stuff tend to sidetrack you long enough to where you get frustrated, but it's actually for your highest good. Funny how things work out that way. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for jumping on. I appreciate you, all of you. We are just about halfway through the chart. How are we doing on time? Ooh, goodness, I'm going too slow. We have to talk about Alice. Let's talk about Alice, who was born 10:49 p.m. in Beech Grove. Aries ascendant. Aries ascendant ruled by Mars and Gemini in the 3rd. So we have this natural tendency for Alice to delve into the realms of writing, teaching, communication. That's what happens when you put the Lord of the chart, the ruler of the ascendant, in the 3rd house. That rules writing, teaching, communication, especially when you put Mars in Gemini. We just talked about Mercury in Aries, and Mars in Gemini. Although Mars in Gemini is a very heated version of that same placement, it's still that same quick-witted, very spicy language, very fast vocality. They share a lot of those similarities because Mercury rules Gemini, Mars rules Aries, and in the last 2 charts we kind of had different versions of that same placement. We have a lot of creativity in the chart, Alice. I really enjoy seeing this, especially because Mercury is in Leo, and Mercury is making a sextile just by a couple degrees to that Mars in Gemini. So there is a slight half reception there, which is strengthening that bond between the 5th house of creativity, 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication. Also makes you a natural born teacher, especially to small children, because that 5th house is the house of children. We do have the North Node, Sun, and Uranus all in the 5th house of children, parenting, sexuality, creativity, making this a very central part of Alice's dynamic from a personal perspective. And I just really like the idea of there being synastry between the 3rd and the 5th houses in the chart. I think that's really fun. But when it comes to work, we have this strictness that's enforced, which I'm not really sure how that's going to play out. We have the moon almost conjoined, separating from, but almost conjoined Pluto in Virgo, 8 degrees and 9 degrees respectively in the 6th house of work. That's going to bring some toxic power dynamics for the first 50 years of life. And Venus in Virgo in the 6th house, the sign of her detriment. Not ideal in the least from a work perspective. And I think that this is something that needs to be addressed in Alice's chart for a couple reasons. She's so creative, she's so fiery, she's so headstrong, but when it comes to actually doing the work, there's this rigidness that comes forward, almost an uncontrollable rigidness, a strictness, a slight harshness. She takes all of those Venusian qualities that would be loving, that would be compassionate, that would be attentive and unconditional, and she slaps Virgo onto it, which is that sign of focus, of organization, of rules, of to-dos, and there's this expectation of orderliness when she knows that creativity doesn't work like that. So it's kind of this juxtaposition really in the chart where the minute that she's put into a work environment, there are these rules, there are these regulations, there are these things that make it difficult for her to express her creativity fully. Therefore, she resents the job. But if she incorporated a little bit more of the creativity into the job and learned how to bend the rules, not break them, but bend the rules, she would be able to find a little bit more long-lasting success in the work environment, as opposed to finding a energy suck kind of in the chart. Speaking of energy sucks, we have the South Node and Saturn in Aquarius, both retrograde in the 11th house of friendships. This really, it's interesting because normally we think of social signs like Aries, Gemini, Leo, as expressive, as signs that really enjoy being out and about with other people. But to see this placement, this South Node and this Saturn in retrograde in the 11th, I'm not too sure that friendships are really where you, and group dynamics are where you recharge, Alice. And I think that this is kind of counterintuitive to your chart just a little bit, but the idea of isolation, very, very appealing to you, very, very needed for you to help process a lot of the stuff that you're going to be working on creatively, but also help to decompress from the rules that you've set upon yourself or have been set on you by others. And I think this is also very true with that Saturn ruling the MC in the 10th, where it's like a lot of the people that you tend to surround yourself with are almost obsessed with success. And that's just not who you are. You know, creativity is where it's at for you. Being an ideal parent, where it's at for you. The idea of that 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication, 5th house of children, parenting, creativity, sexuality, that's going to be where your chart thrives. All of the other placements are kind of pulling you away from that. So we need to understand that there's this push-pull in your chart, and definitely recharging and isolation is something to keep in mind. That really sums up the crux of the chart for sure. Thank you, Alice, for donating your chart to science. Thank you, everybody who's jumping on. Mary, Tristan, everybody on Instagram, Brother Lightheart, always nice to see you, as well as Celestial Melody. Yeah, we're halfway through, so we got 4 more charts to go. Let me do a quick shameless plug. If you are interested in astrology, if you are interested in scheduling a consult, feel free to go to ScorpioRisingAstrology.com, my website, check out my classes, book a consult with me, support the work. And if you would like to be on the live stream, if you would like your chart featured, just private message me your birth date, place, and exact birth time, and I will add you to the queue. Okay. Let's talk about Mary. Hi, Mary. Mary was born 3:45 p.m. in Dublin. I love Dublin. We need to be a little bit picky with the birth time, Mary, just because you're at 29 degrees Sagittarius. Ooh, we've got a Virgo stellium in the 10th. What? Crazy town. Interesting. Whenever I see the 9th house and the 5th house connected, there's this idea of the 9th house representing foreigners and the 5th house representing children being connected in some way when it comes to like adoption or inheriting children or taking in children who are foreign to you, like a foster parent. That's just the first thing that I'll throw out there. But this Virgo stellium is really interesting. We have the Sun in Virgo, Uranus in Virgo, Pluto in Virgo, Jupiter in Virgo, Moon in Virgo. This is a super Virgo chart. And all in that 10th house of success, there's this borderline obsession with the idea of being in the spotlight when it comes to Mary's kind of life plan and life path. But what's really interesting is we have the MC, the midheaven, in the 12th house of karmic healing, of hidden enemies, of hospitalizations. So I think one of the tools that Mary can actually work with. Yeah, this is a great nursing chart for sure, because we've got Taurus on the 6th house of work, ruled by Venus and Libra up in the 11th house of friendships and social groups. So personable, Mary, so personable. Like, you get it done with all this Virgo stuff up in the 10th, but then you really know how to bring in that Venusian sugar, that love and affection, that Mercury in Libra can join that Venus in Libra in the 11th of friendship. Like, you know how to lay it on thick, Mary. I love it, especially when it comes to a work environment. But you know how to get the job done. It's beautiful placements. I really enjoy that for sure. But we do have some interesting playback when it comes to, again, the children and family. That's kind of where the chart is pulling me, because we've got this North Node in Aries and Saturn in Aries retrograde. Excuse me. Saturn in Aries retrograde, both in this 5th house of children, parenting, creativity, sexuality. This is a big life lesson for Mary. This is where she's kind of going, is establishing her own family dynamic. Unfortunately, Aries and Saturn being in the 5th house doesn't necessarily bode well for fertility. So I think this is why she's put the Mars and Leo up in the 9th, as we have this connection to children who are brought in outside of her natural capabilities, and that's a beautiful way to remediate that placement. We also have an interesting dynamic with the children that are brought in actually being very, very successful and financially beneficial to Mary. And this is something that I see a lot in charts where the children who are brought in are financially a little bit more important to the natal chart. And this sounds bad when I say it, because it's like, well, your children are going to be your major source of income. And that's the direct kind of interpretation of it, because we have Saturn in Aries ruling that 2nd house of finance. But also, think about it this way. Once your children grow up and they're actually able to support you, in some cases, I see this a lot in the charts of parents who have child prodigies, where they actually earn money from a very early age, and that financial well-being comes from the children, literally. But then in other cases, like just the idea of, as you start to get up there in age, the children that do come into the life are able to financially take care of you, which I think is a really beautiful way to think about it. And although we have this issue between the 9th and the 12th, higher education does tend to be a little bit of a hidden enemy, potentially, like as a lower expression of this placement, this Mars and Leo ruling the 12th, especially with Neptune and Scorpio, the idea of incurring some sort of physical or mental emotional damage while overseas, very, very prevalent in the chart. But then also when it comes to like higher education, when it comes to learning, school isn't really where Mary learns. Mary learns through doing. Mary learns through actually getting into the work. So I would really caution you to not necessarily choose a job where that requires you to go into more higher education, because that's just going to be the bane of your existence. Like, you're a really hard worker, but the work experience that you get on the job is 10 times more valuable, especially for your chart. We need to highlight those strengths, that stellium and Virgo in the 10th, which I think is really powerful for just your to-do list tendencies. Okay. Good stuff. Tristan, I'm going to delete your comment. Please private message me. Do not post your birth details in the comments. We need to protect privacy. Private message me only, and we will add you to the queue that way. Okay, let's look at Andre's chart. So Andre was born 8:06 p.m. in Washington, and we do have a Scorpio rising, woo, but we do have some negative stuff. We've already talked about the South Node in the first house. Yeah, South Node being that energy suck of the chart. When it's in the first house, the personality is just freaking exhausting. And to almost like, as to be blunt about it, like to be yourself is tiring, especially with Scorpio, because Scorpio like spends so much energy hiding and being subversive and lurking in the shadows. Like that takes a lot of energy, especially in Andre's chart. We also have Neptune in Scorpio retrograde in the first, which we've already talked about as well, escapism tendencies. And this is also really difficult because we have the Lord of the chart, Mars. Ooh, Andre, honey, the odds so stacked against you from the beginning. Like, really, we need to have a chat. Like, we need to have a talk, because you've really made it hard for yourself this go around. And I'm really speaking to you one-on-one from a compassionate place. Like, you told yourself coming into this life experience, I have work to do, and this work is going to be painful. This work is going to be hard. This work is going to be detrimental to my self-esteem. This work is going to be absolutely soul-crushing. Absolutely soul-crushing. However, it will make me the person that I deserve to be. And we see that especially because all of this Neptune South Node in the first, paired with the ruler of the chart, Mars, is in Libra, the sign of its fall, and retrograde in the 12th house of hidden enemies. There's so much, like, you really, like, some people, like, put an ace up the sleeve in the chart, and they kind of stack the deck and they count the cards, and they're able to astrologically kind of move the planets around in order to mitigate those negative qualities. You specifically said, no, I'm not going easy on me. No, I deserve to eat dirt for the first kind of section of my life. Like, I want my face on the pavement 24/7. And that was such an intentional move. I'm very interested to see how you progress through that, because we have some other placements that I think are really interesting and will pull you out of it, but we need to maximize those placements, because at your default for that first year of life, while you were trying to figure out you, dude, it was hard. And it still is hard, and it will always be hard, but there are places in your chart that we can really leverage in order to catapult you out of this detrimental, escapist kind of energy suck that you've strategically kind of trapped yourself into. Because you're trying to play Houdini in this life. You're trying to wrap yourself up in all of this bondage and throw yourself under water and force yourself to escape, because that's what's really going to work off that karma and really force you to forge yourself into being a better person. We do have the sun in Aries in the sign of its exaltation in the 6th house, as well as Saturn in Aries, the sign of its detriment, in the 6th house of work. So there's this love-hate relationship with work. I think you're a very hard worker. I think you're a very determined worker. But again, the idea that you just get such low self-esteem, like, especially in early life, you probably just walked off of job sites because you're like, I feel like crap and I think this job is doing it to me. Totally incorrect. Totally incorrect. It's you who did that to you, not the job. The job does not matter. Yeah. You will be good at what you do if you just channel this sun in Aries tendency of being almost overly exuberantly positive and not letting people get to you. And we've talked a little bit about in other charts this idea of toxic positivity and escapism. Your chart is actually the opposite. We need to sugarcoat stuff. We need to look on the bright side. We need to show up super early, stay late, make friends with the boss. We need to get your 6th house of work really, really exalted, because I think that's where you find some beautiful characteristics. And there's this idea of you hiding you not doing the work that you love because you're afraid that it's a little bit too woo-woo, that it's a little bit too spiritual, that it's a little bit too this or a little bit too that. We have this Jupiter in Cancer up in the ninth house of spirituality, travel, foreigners, higher learning. I have this exact same placement, so I can speak like very, very directly to you when I say that everybody's waiting for you. Like, and ooh, girl, I'm about to cry. Everybody is waiting for you to show who you actually are. Like, for sure. Everybody's waiting. Like, they are waiting. It's almost exceedingly frustrating for the people in your life. Oh, we have such similar placements, honey. We've got this Venus and Taurus right on the edge. People are just, they're waiting for you to throw down the mask that you're wearing, to stop hiding yourself, to actually like be vulnerable. And that's really, really difficult, especially like talking one-on-one, Andre, because it's me and you right now. I don't care who's watching. We're on this wavelength. It's about me and you specifically understanding that the idea of your chart is to be vulnerable. This act that I'm doing right here, this act of me live streaming and talking about something that I've been studying since I was 16, but never thought it was worth it because astrology is this woo-woo thing that nobody can prove and everybody's going to laugh at me because I am interested in this. Boom, it's paying my bills. What are you going to do? That's what we need from you, Andre. Have the hustle. Work the job, but I want you to practice your vulnerability, and I want you to really focus on these things, these aspects of yourself that are much more powerful than you give them credit for, that are much more spiritually linked to your destiny, that you just keep under wraps, honey. It's just not ideal. We need you to focus on those things because we're waiting. Like, we're really waiting for you to do the thing and for you to quit playing around and stop giving us stuff that we don't want to see. We're like, oh, there he goes. I'm going to make a really terrible reference, and I'm not sure that you're going to get it. But SpongeBob SquarePants, stay with me. SpongeBob SquarePants has an episode in the early episodes of SpongeBob where he's at the beach and he makes everybody laugh because he rips his pants unintentionally, and that becomes the rolling joke. But he overuses that joke, and everybody starts to get tired of it. And so they start leaving him alone, and he keeps trying to get people's attention via that same thing over and over, when really it was funny the first time, not necessarily funny the second or third time. So we're over this act, Andre. We want to see some more authenticity. We want to see some more of you, because there's a lot to work on. There's a lot to do. And I think that if we allow you to slink back into your comfort zone, to slink back into your normal, to slink back into what's expected, we don't activate the highest placements in your chart. So that was just for you, Andre. I absolutely love you. Thank you so much for allowing me the pleasure of passing on that message to you. Cool. Yes, Cece, actually, we are getting to yours right now. We are on the last two charts, so let's talk about Cece. So we have Cece's chart, born 6:50 p.m. in El Centro. Let's take a peek. So we've got this Capricorn ascendant being ruled by Saturn and Aries in the fourth with North Node. Not necessarily a fan of that. Moon in Cancer, great. Opposing the ascendant, not so great. Mercury in Cancer, great. Mars in Cancer, not so great. Just taking a look-see. How do I want to talk about this? So when we see the North Node in the fourth, there's this idea of needing to put down roots, needing to make a family as the highest expression of the chart, for sure. Especially with Mars and Cancer in the seventh house of relationships, your Moon, your Mercury here, the idea of you having that white picket fence, 2.5 kids, that 0.5 is a dog, like you living the American dream is definitely something that we see a lot in your chart. Having that stability, having that home that you can constantly come back to, but you can also like use as a creative project every once in a while. We need to shift our focus into that fourth house of nourishing the the roots of the life, as opposed to kind of striking off on your own and doing the thing and being an entrepreneur. You have entrepreneurship tendencies in the chart, honey, but the issue is that that's not where your life is going. It's where it's easy. Yeah, it's easy for you to stand up and to actually say, hey, look, this is what I think, and I'm right because I'm awesome. But where we actually need to pull the chart is to get some of that kind of parental humility, and to actually have your business be your family unit. Yeah. Because it's an investment. Yeah. A lot of people invest in real estate. Some people invest in stocks. I'm telling you to invest in a home and invest in your family. That's really what the chart is asking with this, this Venus in Leo, Sun in Leo, paired with the Mars in Cancer ruling the fourth. I think that that's a smart move for you to specifically like double down on family stuff. We also have this Mercury in Cancer ruling the sixth house of work, going into business with a spouse, with a relative, with somebody who you have partnered your life with. Again, it's just like you keep pulling everything back into fourth house of family, seventh house of relationships, and then you have these success and these career markers, but it's not where you're supposed to be going in the chart. Like the illusion of success, of what other people define as success, of, oh, I have this yacht, and oh, I have all this money, and oh, I have this empire that I've created from scratch. It's not about you, right? Not this time around. Anyway, we need to focus on the roots. We need to focus on creating a stable foundation. And I think that because we have Saturn in Aries, as well as Mars in Cancer, we might have even had some like moving around tendencies in the chart. We might have had in your chart, CC, this idea of family units being a little bit unstable, being a little bit too strict, and you're able to now rectify that, remediate that by creating your own version of what it's like to be in a family unit. We also have the second house of finance in Aquarius being ruled by that Saturn in Aries. I really, really think, CC, the more you can associate with things like real estate, home stuff, working with your spouse, developing an ideal family, creating that white picket fence and those 2.5 kids, really working on treating the life as a business. Yeah, that's what your chart is really asking you to do. And plus, I mean, the more, like, I really enjoy your chart because it's practical. Like, there's so much about your chart where I try to go into other areas of life and I'm like, well, what about this? And the chart immediately redirects. Nope, it's all about the family time. Nope, it's all about working on the relationship with the spouse. Nope, it's all about earning money from the home. And just this idea of, like, even your 11th house of friendships. You have Neptune and Scorpio retrograde. Girl, you had some interesting friends growing up, let me tell you. Let me tell you. And there was some illicit substances involved, and that was sure as hell fun. But now, as you express that higher version of Neptune throughout the life, that Neptune in Scorpio is ruled by that Mars in Cancer in the seventh. Like, your spouse that you choose is going to be your best friend, is going to be the person that you want to spend the rest of your life with, is going to be super fun and slightly dark and very mysterious, but also just a big old teddy bear. Cancer on the seventh with the moon in the seventh really brings a partner who just has this mushy, gushy sense of, I love to be loved and to love. It's a beautiful placement for sure. But also understand that acts of service is a major love language for any spouse that you get. So you're going to need to kind of, although you're so focused on running this house, on making sure that everything is where it needs to be, especially with that Capricorn ascendant. Even though you have this Leo sun, we need to be aware that this Capricorn ascendant being ruled by Saturn in the fourth, like you kind of turn into a drill sergeant, CC, just a little bit. And I think that it is important for you to allow your spouse, your partner, the person that you have in your life that you've chosen to bond with, or the people, depending, that you allow them to take care of you, that you allow them to cater to you in that way, because that's as affirming to your bond and your purpose. Because once you work the fields, yeah, once you plant the seeds, Once you do the hard work and you farm, yeah, then you have to enjoy the bounty too. And I think the spouse that you've chosen is the perfect person to remind you, hey, take a load off. Hey, let me cook for you. Hey, let me care for you, because you've done such a good job of providing, yeah, of ordering, of organizing, of getting the foundation correct, that we're in a stable enough place to enjoy. Yeah, so that's your chart in a nutshell, my dear. Okay. Hello, everybody jumping on. We have one more chart to go, and just a couple more minutes before we hit an hour. Time just seems to fly when you're looking at the stars. So we have Dean. Dean was born at 10:17 a.m. in Oklahoma City. Let's take a look at Dean's chart. We have Sagittarius on the ascendant, making Jupiter the ruler of the chart. Ooh, ooh, and Jupiter is exalted in Pisces. Oh, my Instagram decided to fail. Sorry. The recording is on Facebook and YouTube. So we have this Sagittarius ascendant being ruled by Jupiter in Pisces in the fourth. I'm a huge fan of this placement. I really, really like it. But again, the ruler of the chart is in the fourth house of family. So we have a similarity between the two charts, where we've really put so much of that self-emphasis on the fourth house of family. It is a family-oriented chart. That fourth house is really that, and especially having Jupiter in Pisces here, like, it's such a beautiful placement. The idea of the home being where one recharges, where one takes respite, where one is actually able to create space for the self and others. We do have some tricky aspects in the chart, though, Dean, that we do need to address. We do need to talk about these things. The first is going to be that Uranus and Virgo making an opposition to that Jupiter, as well as Pluto and the MC up in the 10th, being ruled by Mercury and Libra in the 11th. So we have this dynamic in the chart, Dean, that's developing, where we see, although you understand, like, my roots are my home. I must have house. Yeah, must play house as first priority. There is this constant dragging away from that home environment, because we have this unpredictable work schedule. We have a lot of trauma that you deal with in the work environment. We have a lot of higher learning that needs to be done in the chart. We have a lot of really interesting teaching dynamics that are in the chart, dealing with groups. We have just a lot of professional and self-development things that are pulling you out of that family dynamic. And I think that that's a little bit tricky. It's tricky to balance, because we have, on one hand, you've staked your claim so strongly to say, I am family, right? Family men. But we have all these placements that are friendship oriented, that are teaching oriented, large group oriented, that are success and work and trauma oriented, things that you can't necessarily take into the home. In fact, things that would detract you from taking into the home. When we see this moon in Gemini as well being ruled by Mercury and Libra in the 11th, there are things that you just can't tell your spouse. There are secrets, there are aspects of your life, of your work, of yourself, especially with this Venus in Scorpio, this Neptune in Scorpio in the 12th of hidden enemies. Like, there are really dark things that you've come across that really cannot be vocalized. And even if you could vocalize them, they're very difficult to say. And it becomes this balancing act of trying to keep things light, keep things energetic, keep things prosperous, but also respecting that there's real shit in the chart, where we have to dig deep, and a lot of that you start to work through from a professional perspective. The daily grind of the job is very, very therapeutic for you. You need that predictability, but because at a certain point you get good at your job, you get transferred to this department, transferred to that department, schedules start to be unpredictable, you have to hire assistants and delegate, and then that changes things, the way that you operate and you work, and there's just so much of this dynamic that I think is important for you to understand, that the whole thing about your chart is we have this grounded root in the foundation of the fourth house of family, but as you grow and as you evolve and as you understand that your place and your destiny is actually pulling you outside of the family, we need to balance all these spinning plates and all these moving parts. And I think that relying on your ability to delegate, relying on your ability to work with large groups, going to be important. But I think that also respecting the idea of if you're not doing the work, you're not working on yourself vicariously through the work. Yeah, because when your head is down and when you're crunching numbers and when you're doing that daily grind and checking off those things to your to-do list, there's a therapeutic aspect to that really hits on some karmic stuff, that hits on some deep-seated subconscious stuff where you feel like you're sorting through this really detrimented Venus and in Scorpio in the 12th house of hidden enemies that you can't really get when you're the guy on top who's just pointing fingers and telling people where to go. It's not therapeutically valuable at that point. Yeah, but it all comes back down to the home. And I think that as long as you understand that if it's that song that got really popular recently, the house don't fall if the bones are good. That's really the essence of your chart, but you are in the process of growing as an individual, which makes it tricky to balance that stability with that forward momentum of growth. But I think you can do it. I think you can do it, Dean. We just got to be a little bit more specific on how we balance those things. Okay. That is it, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for the Astro-Babble. I appreciate it. This is lovely. We will continue to do it tomorrow. If you would like to submit your birth date, place, and time to the queue, private message me. Do not comment. Do not share your private information publicly on social media. Message me privately. I'll add you to the queue and message you when your chart is featured. If you would like to see the replay of this video or previous live streams, just go to the YouTube channel. If you search ScorpioRisingAstrology.com, which is my website, the channel will pop up. But also, if you'd like to support my work, just go to ScorpioRisingAstrology.com. Purchase an online class if you're interested in astrology. Schedule a consult if you'd like to work one-on-one with me, and we can dissect your placement. But until next time, may the stars be ever in your favor.